So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, wait, what did you guys tell me to do? So I'll do only one and is truthy, I guess, since that's what you guys voted for. Be sure to vote. So if I did, um, const is, oh wait, I have to share my screen. Duh. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. Okay, so const is true. Whoops, is truthy. Okay, and this is just gonna take. This is just gonna take a single parameter, right? A single argument. So I'll do value. Okay. So this problem said if it's truthy, return true. Otherwise, return a specified string based off of what kind of falsy value it is. And if you remember from the lecture and if you remember from the slides, there are not that many falsy values. We have to look out for 0, we have to look out for null, we have to look out for undefined, undefined, we have to look out for empty string, and we have to look out for 0, null, empty string, undefined, false, right? Also, not a number. However, I don't think that was required for the question. Because if you ever console.log, this is false, okay? So this is weird because not a number isn't really like a data type. Like you really should think of not a number as strictly an error, okay? This is an error. So a way to check if something is a number is like number dot is nan, and we do like nan. Then we say true. False, right? Okay, so this is how you can check. But, I mean, you're never really going to need to do that. So basically, we want to see if it's this or if it's truthy. So the first thing we need to do is get rid of the fact that if it's a truthy value or not. So we could just say if, make our if statement, right? So what are we going to say? If it's truthy, we're going to return true, right? Right? So how do we check if it's truthy? If Boolean of value is triple equal to true, right? Because doesn't truthiness mean that if you coerce that value into a Boolean and it's true, that means it's truthy, right? So this is how you coerce something into a Boolean. However, isn't there a shorthand way of doing this? Do I really have to write the capital Boolean all the time? Nah, I don't have to do that, right? I can do bang bang. Bang bang value coerces that value into a truthy value, so then I check if it's true. However, do I really need to check if it's true? This will return true if it's a truthy value, and then the if statement will just say, hey, is this true? Whatever this is, it's going to be, this bang bang makes it a truthy statement, right? It makes it a true or false value, right? So then we'll say if true, if false, we'll do return true. However, do I really need to even coerce it into a Boolean like that? I can just do if value. Because conditional expressions, conditional statements, the if statement, already coerces whatever you put inside of it into true or false. It does that for you. So you don't actually have to make this a Boolean before the if statement reads it. Because the if statement will just read it, its truthiness. You know what I mean? So if this value is truthy, we'll return true. If it's not truthy, we'll make it past line 12, right? So if it's not truthy, we can do if value, now we have to check the actual value, is equal to 0. We can return, I'm blanking on what the string was, but let's just go with this. The value 0 is falsy. I know you had to write a specific string. Let's just say this is a specific string. I don't know. And we could say if value is triple equal to null, return the value null is falsy. Usually these questions get really annoying if they expect a period in like a long string and you kind of miss it. So just be aware of that, okay? If value is equal to undefined, return the value that's undefined is falsy, right? And if empty string, well, if value is equal to empty string, return, the value empty string is falsy, right? And so on and so forth. I don't have to do everything, right? So, well, I just have one more. So, if value equals false, so this is literally what you had to do to solve this problem. If this value was truthy, we would return true, and then the function would end, so all of this code is unreachable, right? Then we do a series of if statements. If this value was false, this would not run, then this would not run, then this would not run, this would not run, and then we hit here, and then we get the string we wanted to, right? So we don't really need an if-else condition, right? We just need a series of ifs. If this is this, return this. If this is this, return this. If this is this, return this, and so on and so forth. So this problem was a lot easier than the question made it out to be. Any questions on is truthy? None, right? Awesome. Okay. So let's comment this out. And then what else do you guys want?
All right, can I ask one question on it?
Yeah, sure.
So it's the return. So when a function hits return, it automatically a return hits a return statement, it stops. Correct?
Yeah, the function stops.
So if those were all console log statements, and two of those ifs were true, it would print two console log statements.
Okay, so you're saying like if I had like or value equals null, so that means if
two
the
of
value
those if statements somehow could be true. So if it
yeah,
checked,
like and this was
okay.
a console log, right? So
Uh-huh.
like if the value was null, then this would run and this would run, right? If they were console log statements, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I just want to check. Thank you.
We don't need to do that though because we're returning inside of the if statements, so we know these will never get hit.
Right. I was just asking.
Yeah, no, for sure. Any other questions? All right, cool. So let's do const only one. So only one will take val1, val2, and val3, right? Whoops. Basically, what we want to check if only one of these values is true, truthy, and the other two falsy. So this could be a little confusing and complicated, right? However, it's really not. It's really just three if statements. If Boolean of val1 is equal to true, and Boolean of val2 is equal to false. and Boolean of val3 is equal to false.
So in this one, we can't use the triple equal sign.
Oh, it said no?
No.
Oh, I was just going to show you that you could just do this instead, right? Like you could just do...
Sorry, just mentioning.
If val1, bang, bang, right? So bang, bang reflects truthiness, right? So if this should be true, right? And how do we check to see if this is false with the bang operator? Just one bang, right? Just one bang. So what I'm saying is, if this is true, this is false, and this is false, right? Because if this is false, not false would be true, right? Is everybody okay with this? Not false would be true. Not false would be true. So true, true, true. If all of these statements are true, then we'll return true. And we can do the same thing again, except we switch the place of the double bang. Because now we want to say, like, okay, if this statement is true, that means that val1 is the only true one, so we'll return true. However, let's say val1 was false. So then we'll say, okay, if val1 is false, then let's see if val2 is true. And val3 is false. Let's say both of these were false. So val1 and val2 are false. So let's check it one more time over here. Val1, val2, val3. If any of these are true, we'll return true. Otherwise, we just return false at the end. If all of these were true, if val1, val2, and val3 were true, this would be true. However, not true would be false. So that means this bang would make that false. So this would never run. You know what I mean? Any questions?
I have a question. I just wanted to check that similar to the prior solution that you went through. Like, we don't necessarily need the double bang for like things like val1 in the first line, right? Or
yeah, you don't actually need these.
Yeah. Okay. Just wanted to check that.
It's true, you don't. However, like sometimes, even though you technically don't need them,
I think you're frozen. Oh no, you're not.
No. Sorry, that's my bad. I was just I had somebody slack me. So even though you don't need these, sometimes like putting this makes it more explicit. Like I am checking to see if this value is truthy or not. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But like you don't really need that. Any other questions? Dope. All right. So now, without further ado, we'll get into scope. One second. Everyone's good for sure? Okay, cool. 1 second. Okay. Okay, cool. Everyone can see my screen again? Alright, dope. So, scope. What is scope, right? Like, what is that? What am I talking about? I haven't said that at all until today. Like, that must be some new rule. And it is a new rule. It's a new, like, truth. It's a truth that you need to be aware of. So, scope is the fact that, it's not the fact, it's like, scope refers to when you can access a certain part of your code. Okay? variables. I'm talking about variables. So let's say, I'll give you an example. So let's say I have this function, hello. I'll set that equal to an anonymous function. So hello will take a name, and then I'll say console.log hello name, right? So when I do hello and I pass in Steve, we get hello Steve, right? Right? Cool. So that's what our hello function does, right? What if I change this to hello stupid, right? And then I say let stupid name equal stupid plus name. And then I pass in my own name, right? So that means I get hello. Wait, what happened? Oh, hello is not defined. Oh, hello stupid. I pass in hello stupid, and then I console.log stupid name, right? So hello stupid Marco, right? So what if I move this to here, and I don't run this function? Can I access stupid name from out here? No. I can't do that. And this is what I mean by scope, okay? The stupid name variable is not inside of this outer scope. You can think of scope as being like layers. Out here in my page, where I am right now, I am in the global scope. So that means that this function, hello stupid, this variable, that is defined inside of the global scope. Okay? So if I'm trying to access this variable, stupid name, inside the global scope, right? I'm not inside anything. I'm not in a function. I'm not in an if statement or in a for loop. That means that I'm looking outside here for a variable stupid name. Now, as a person, I can see that there's a variable stupid name here, but JavaScript can't do that because stupid name is defined inside of hello stupid. It's defined inside of a function. That means it is defined inside of that function's local scope. And when you try to read variable names, you can only look up. You can only look up from scope, okay? You can't look down into something else's scope. Like if I did this, if I did that, and then I called hello stupid again, this is fine. Because what happens is that, forget I'm passing in a variable now, right? Now it doesn't matter, right? This name doesn't matter. So what is happening is, okay, JavaScript hits line 54. It says, okay, I have a function I need to invoke. So I look for hello stupid, here it is, and I run this function. Console.log, a string hello, and a variable stupid name. JavaScript says, what the hell is this? I don't know what this is. This is not in my programming language. I have to see what value this holds. And it looks inside of its own local scope. And it doesn't find anything. When you don't find anything in your own local scope, you look one scope up. And that's where we find it in the global scope. So that's why we can do this. If I did let stupid name equal extremely stupid Marco, right? What we get here is hello extremely stupid Marco, right? Why is this happening? It's because of what I just said, right? We look at our own local scope first before we look up. So that means if you have two things that have the same variable and you try to access that thing inside here, what we do is we look, okay, where is this variable stupid name? Oh, it's defined inside our local scope. That must be it. So we access that and use it here. We don't look anymore. We don't have to look up into the global scope. Any questions on this? Who's confused? Is anyone confused? Is anybody confused? No? Okay. So I feel like you all might have experienced something like this when you were writing your own functions. Maybe, like, this kind of makes sense, right? Like, if I define this in here, like, let's say this is gone, right? If I define this in here, then I can't just say console.log stupid name, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? The same thing goes for anything with a code block, okay? So what we say is the global scope is your page, right? That's your global everything. Like, this function is in the global scope, right? And then this variable stupid name is in functional or local scope. Either one is accepted. It's the same thing, right? But then there's this other thing that's called block scope, okay? Block scope is anything with a code block. Right? I cannot console.log hello because it was defined inside of an if statement. Can't do it. I is not defined. Same thing with for loops, right? This I is being defined inside of this for loop. So you can't access that I outside. But what if I did a double for loop? But I called them the same thing. It looks like we're accessing the same thing, right? We'll see tomorrow with multi-dimensional arrays why if you ever do a double for loop, this I should be changed to something else. Because if you make this I, that means you completely lose contact with the I up here. Because this I will always be this I. It will never look up to the other for loop, okay? This is just a little preview as to why we can't do that. But it's very scope related, okay? I won't talk too much about that. Let's go back to this example. What if I used var? This is why var is not good. Var ignores block scope, okay? Don't use var, okay? Repeat after me. Don't use var. Oh, cool. I saw some mouths move. I love it. All right? Please, seriously, this is like the double equal sign. It's not in practice anymore. People don't use that. If you show up to a job interview and you're using var to define all your variables, they're going to laugh at you in your face, they're going to smack you in the head, and they're going to throw you out of their office. That's what's going to happen. Not really, but that's what it'll feel like, because they'll probably just make fun of you. You know what I mean? And that's a bad feeling. So don't use var and don't use double equals. They're just not in use anymore, okay? So, anyways, besides that, let's go to a different example let's go to a different example. Let's do like let's actually, yeah, let's do this. So let's say we'll say goodbye, right? This is going to take a name. What am I going to see in the console, Steve or Marco? Put your votes in the chat. Votes in the chat. Steve or Marco? What am I going to see in the console? I see 2 Steves, and that's correct. Goodbye, Steve, right? Now I'm going to see Marco, right? And no, I'm not going to see Marco. Do you know why this is happening? I feel like you might have figured this out already before I'm going to tell you, but I'll tell you anyway because that's my job, right? So basically, because I'm not passing in anything, I went over this already. Because I'm not passing in anything to this function, when I define the function, I define it to take a parameter, right? But I don't have to pass anything into the function. However, that parameter is still defined. This is still going to have this is still going to be declared, right? It's still going to be a declared variable, and its value will just be undefined. And you saw this in the loop workshop, right? Like with our index of or slice method that we were making, right? If you don't pass anything into the start value, then the start value will be undefined, so we have to make it 0, right? So that means if you don't pass anything, name will be equal to undefined. However, it's still a declared value. Right? It's still a declared value. That means it still exists, and it is still in this function's local scope. So when I say goodbye name, JavaScript is like, what the hell is name? I have to find out. Oh, I found something with the name. I found something with the name. That must be what this person's talking about. But here, it's undefined, because that's what this name's value is. It doesn't look at here. It never reaches there, because it found something called name. Okay? So if I got rid of here, now I get Marco. And if I put Steve back in, I still get Marco, because I'm not passing anything name into here, right? And I put name back, and I get Steve. Any questions? Yeah.
What was that last function you were showing us? Return name.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Like, what if we returned it? So
Yeah.
if we return, oh wait, let me. I'm not sharing my screen anymore. So if we don't console log this, right? Right?
But isn't a return variable available outside the scope of the function, or no?
Right. So what happens if I do let right? I can pull that variable out, and it's here, right? Like, returning and console logging is different. Console logging just prints something over here. I can't use that value. But now that I'm returning this, right? Now that I'm returning this value, that means this function is going to return a value that I can put into a variable here, and I can use that value in this global scope out here. Does that make sense? Like, returning values is the whole point of functions, right? You either want functions to alter some big source of data, or you want them to return an answer to something, right? Those are pretty much the only two things that you need functions for, right? And those two things matter so much. They're everything, right? So if functions don't return a value, they better be altering something up here. If they're not, if they are, then we can use that value, put it in here, and I could use what am I with other parts of my code. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions before I go into the slides? The slides. All good, huh? I feel like scope is pretty logical if you think about it. Some things you might not have expected, like with the whole name thing and passing it in with the global name variable, like what's going to happen. Oh, it's undefined. Like that might have been a little surprising, but I feel like everything is pretty logical and makes sense. So just yell out to me if you have any questions, all right? Otherwise, we will get into some slides. So these slides, can everyone see these slides? Awesome. So we're going to talk about like what is scope, types of scope, global functional block, functions, and hoisting. I forgot to talk about hoisting, but I'll just explain that quickly because it's something you should be aware of, but you know, it's a little bit more of an advanced topic. And then scope best practices. Oh shit. So scope refers to which variables can be accessed by your code at a specific location in your code, right? So let wow equal wow. Console.log wow, wow. So I'm defining wow inside of the global scope, right? And then I'm console logging, I'm accessing that inside of the same scope. So we see wow over here. Even though a global variable can be referenced from anywhere in your code, the value assigned to the variable cannot be accessed until after the assignment operation occurs. I'll go back to this, but if you try this in REPL, this will throw an error, okay? Because REPL has its own things that it's doing. However, in an actual file, this is what happens, okay? Like, and this goes to hoisting. This is because of hoisting, and I'll go over that in like a few slides. However, basically, hoisting is before we run through this code, what JavaScript does is it looks for variable declarations and it looks for functions, okay? For function definitions. And what it does is it puts, wait for it, in memory. It puts this variable and it sets up a space for it in memory, okay? So then that means that what is wait for it going to be though if it's in memory? It's going to be undefined. We haven't defined it yet. It gets defined here on line 7. So when we try to console.log wait for it, it does exist. It exists in memory. Its value is just undefined because we never assigned it a value here. So that's why on line 9 we do get here I am. And that's why on line 5 we get undefined. It's because of hoisting, okay? There's a slide on hoisting later, so but that's what it is. Functions, I'll talk about functions later. So variables declared inside of a function are locally scoped, right? And they cannot be referenced outside of the function. So, like I showed you before, when we run happy function, we get I am so happy in the console, right? Because that's what this message is, and we're console logging that message. And the message is defined inside line 6, inside of that function. So if you try and console.log that message on line 11 outside of that function, we are console.logging inside the global scope, but message is defined inside of happy function's local scope. We cannot go down into another scope. We can only look up, right? If message was defined out here, that means that this can still read that, right? Okay. What if a variable is defined locally and globally? Let message equal think globally. Function log a message. We define let message equal act locally. JavaScript will look for message locally first. First, it looks for its own scope. Okay? It looks throughout its own scope. So we find message here on line 6, and then on line 9, we console log it, act locally. We do not ever, this function never looks at line 3, ever, because it finds it on line 6. This makes sense, right? Hell yeah. Nice. If it can't find it locally, JavaScript will look at the scope outside the function. This case, the global scope, right? So console.log message, JavaScript sees that there's a variable in here called MSG, and it's act locally, right? But that's not message, that's not what we're looking for, and we can't find anything message inside of this function log a message, so that means we're going to look one level up. We look one level up, okay? And that one level up happens to be the global scope. And then, oh, we found something that's called message, so we look console.log think globally. All good? Dope. All right. Parameters are also scoped, locally scoped. And this is what I showed you before, right? So think globally is defined on line 3, but now log a message is going to take a parameter. It's going to take an argument message, right? Console.log message, act locally, we pass into log a message on line 9, so act locally is what we get in the console. Let's look at this. Let's look at this for a second. Consider this nested function, right? So we let the global variable equal to a string global, and that's defined on line 2. Then we define a function on line 4 called outer, okay? Let's skip what outer does for a second. And then on line 14, we run outer, okay? So we run outer here. So let's see what outer does. Outer defines a variable outer var to a string outer. Then it defines a function inner. Let's skip what inner does. And then outer calls inner. Okay? So outer is effectively defining this function, and then calling inner. Okay? So let's run inner. Let inner var equal inner, const.log global var outer var inner var. And that's what we get. What happens is inner, when we're running inner on line 11, and then on line 9, console log global var, JavaScript says, okay, where's global var defined inside of inner? It's not, so we look one up. It looks at outer. Where is global var defined in outer? It's not, so we look one up. And we find global var here, and that's why we see the global here. And so on and so forth with the outer and inner, right? We first look at inner, then we look at outer, and then we look in global, right? Any questions? Okay. Now let's look at here. So we say let collision equal global. Function outer is going to take a parameter that's also called collision. Then we have function inner, and we define collision inside and set it equal to inner. Then we console.log collision. What are we going to see in the console? Inner. Because we look at our own global scope, our own local scope first. We found collision, so we don't look up anymore. Now we get outer, because we're no longer defining anything inside of inner, and when we console.log collision, we say, all right, well, there's nothing inside of inner called collision. Let's look one scope up. Let's look at outer scope. Oh, there's a parameter that's called collision here. And when we pass in outer on line 12 to outer, that means collision in this point of time is going to be equal to outer. So that's what we're going to console log. Now we get global, because we no longer have a parameter that is taking, that is meant, that was defined with outer, right? There's no longer a parameter defined here. So even though we're passing in an argument, outer, collision can't read that because outer was never set up to capture any variable that was being passed in, right? So that means we look all the way up and we get global. Let's look what's happening here though. Note the inner function can access the scope of the outer function, but the opposite is not true, right? So even though that this is inside of this function, right? Console.log is inside of outer var. However, we're trying to log inner var. Even though inner var is defined inside of outer var, we still can't get that. Inner var is not defined because it is only defined inside of inner. This is still its own scope. It's its own local scope. Any questions? I'll let you look over this one for a second, right? We call outer. What happens when we call outer? We say, okay, we define outer var is equal to outer. Then we define this function inner. Then we run inner. So let's run inner. We define inner var inside of inner. We console.log outer var inner var. JavaScript looks for outer var, can't find it in inner, so we look one scope up and we find it in outer. That's why we get outer over here. Then we console.log inner var, we look inside of inner for inner var, we find it here, so that's why we get console.log inner. Then line 10 is done. We just ran inner. So we go to line 11 and we console.log inner var. We look at the outer var scope. We do not look at inner var scope. We look at outer var scope. There is no inner var. So that means we have to look at the global scope. There is nothing there. So that means we can't find it. This is an error. It's undefined. Okay? Any questions? Awesome. Okay. What happens now? So the inner function still looks for a local declaration of the variable name before looking at the next level of scope. So now, inner is the one that is taking outer var, right? So when we console.log outer var, we never passed anything into inner, so we get undefined. And this is what I showed you guys before, right? When the same thing happens, right? We call outer, we define outer var, we define inner, we call inner. We don't pass anything into inner. Now this function inner takes a parameter, right? So we let inner var equal inner, we console.log outer var, we look at our own scope first, and we found outer var. However, its value is undefined because we never passed in an argument. Does this make sense to everybody? Nice, nice. All right. Any block of code inside of curly brackets creates its own scope too. So we say, if true, let block equal Jenny from the. Console.log block and then the string block. So we get Jenny from the block. But if we console.log block the variable on line 9, we get a reference error. Block is not defined. Same thing. This is simple scope, but but you have to know that it exists for anything with curly brackets, okay? Anything with curly braces. If statements, while loops, for loops. All of those things with curly braces, okay? Var is stupid. So if true, var block equal Jenny from the. Console.log block block. So we get Jenny from the block. But when we console.log block on line 8 and we get Jenny from the. Why would you ever need to do that? I'll answer that question for you. You will never need to do that. That's why var is stupid. It's just not useful anymore, okay? Just don't use it, okay? Okay. So here we go, functions and hoisting. So this is what I wanted to. I mentioned before that I wanted to talk a little bit about functions and hoisting when I defined what hoisting actually is. So when you define functions with the function keyword, it is different than making functions like I do here. Right? You guys can see the REPL? Defining this like this treats goodbye like a variable. Its value is an anonymous function. However, it's still just a variable. So during hoisting, this gets stored into memory and its value will be undefined, right? However, here, we are defining something with the function keyword. So, like I said, just a little refresher, when JavaScript hoists, before it reads line-by-line code, it scans for variable declarations and function definitions, right? This is considered a variable declaration because it's const goodbye. If it was let goodbye, it would be the same thing because I'm using the let or in the const keyword, right? So this would be stored in memory as undefined. However, that is not the case with function. With the function keyword, what is actually stored in memory is the entire function's code. The entire function's code is stored inside memory. So yes, this will work. I am calling this function before I define it over here. This is actually kind of cool, right? Because let's say you're building a bigger program and you're solving a bigger problem. Like let's say in the loop workshop, the most vowels problem, you know how it was beneficial to make your own helper function that would actually determine if that letter was a vowel or not? And it's nice, you could have actually pulled that out of your bigger function and just put it at the bottom of the page. So you don't have to look at it, you know? Like you can take these small functions and kind of just put them at the bottom and like, okay, you can kind of put a comment above them and say, these are my helper functions, and then you could like kind of look through your helper functions. And everything will work fine if it's made with the function keyword. Variables and function declarations are moved to the top of their scope before a code execution. That's really what happens, okay? Any questions on this? This is like a little bit more of an advanced topic. It's not like you don't really need to know it that much, but it's good to know.
So when is it more useful to use the function keyword, and when is it more useful to use the variable keywords? I mean, obviously not variable, but let or const.
So I will talk about that when we talk about object methods. It's a little bit, because yes, there's this difference with hoisting. There's this difference with hoisting. However, there is another difference between using these two that is more important, in my opinion, that I'll get into in like 3 days. Okay. So I don't want to like put too much information in all of your guys' heads. Okay. But usually, I use things with const unless I want to move the function if you want to move the function to the bottom of your page for some reason, define it with the function keyword. Otherwise, I define everything with const. Cool? Any questions? Any other questions? Nice.
Wait, you said for hoisting, if we're defining functions, hoisting can move declarations and functions to the top of their scope, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we have to define them when they're placed in memory for them to run to the top of their scope? Or will they run automatically?
What do you mean run?
Okay, well, assuming declarations and functions are in the local variable, if they're placed in memory and they're undefined, do we automatically have to define them, or is console log just going to run them automatically and get nothing?
I don't think I'm following what you're saying. Like if you're saying like if I define this function like
Well, no, like have a function within the function for the local scope.
Oh, like the function inside the function?
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Okay. Now the const no wait. Is const a function or a variable here?
This is a variable.
Okay, it's a local variable.
So you want me to do this?
Okay, now we have a function within the function.
Yeah.
So, but we haven't defined goodbye, have we?
We haven't defined goodbye? What do you mean? Like, up here?
Oh no, I meant within the curly brackets. I mean, we have a return goodbye plus the name variable, but has goodbye been defined?
I mean, I'm defining goodbye right here. Right? When I make it. However, I can't do this anymore. Like, this will throw an error on line 71. Because even though, like, yeah, it looks for function names in the global scope, it's only looking for hello, because goodbye is being defined inside of hello. So I can no longer do this. Like, I could do, like, hello, and then what am I will be something, right? I mean, this isn't returning anything. I can return false, and then this will be false, right? When I console.log, what am I? Because I could still run this function down here, even though I can run this function up here, even though it's defined down here, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Well, that first hello is outside the function hello, right?
What first hello? This?
When you had let what am I, you had it as hello.
Yeah.
Oh wait, that was a variable value, not a variable itself.
So what am I will be the variable. I'm declaring what am I to be a variable, and we're going to store that in memory. Okay? We're going to store that in memory, and its value will be undefined. Okay? But also, hello will be hello will also be stored in memory, but its definition will be this function, right? Because I'm using it with the function keyword. Like if I console.log hello up here, and I console.log what am I here, I get the function hello. But see, this is what I mean like REPL. Like REPL won't let you do this. Okay? I think it does if you use var, but yeah, it does if you do var. But if you use the let keyword, I think REPL doesn't let you do this. But you can see here that this is just the function hello, right? It's there. It's hoisted, okay? Don't think too much about this though, okay? It's starting to get a little confusing for no reason. Any other questions?
I have one question, just out of curiosity. So if you have a function, but there's like a variable defined within the function,
Yeah.
Would the hoisting still work for that function, or would the just because like we were talking about how variables have a stored placeholder in the memory.
Like if there was like a variable like let my var.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Exactly. Yeah.
No, so this won't be hoisted.
Okay.
Because
so
how hoisting works is it goes through the global scope.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So then if you were to run the function like, up front before that function is defined, it wouldn't do it because there's a variable in there that it needs.
Yeah, I don't know what would happen if I did like this and I console.log. I don't know what would happen if I did this actually. Let me see. Oh, there's too much stuff is going on, damn it. Okay, so this is kind of hoisted too, I guess. Yeah, I don't really know. Okay.
So it's not hoisted.
Yeah, no, I mean it's not like hoisted like out here. Like if I tried to do like console.log my var out here, no, I can't do that.
No, my question is, sorry, just to clarify, my question is like, because I think before you showed an example of being able to run a function, even if like you're calling that function before you define it, right?
Yeah, right here. But if I console.log like my var here, and I run hello, right? I still get hello.
Yeah, okay, that's what I wanted to know. Okay, so it does seem like if the variable is defined within the function, then JavaScript will kind of consider that as part of like the memory of the function.
It'll be the memory of the function because what is stored is actually going to be this.
Yeah.
Like
okay.
this entire code block will be stored in memory only because I'm using the function keyword.
Exactly. Okay, that makes sense.
Like if I did like const with the fat arrow, this wouldn't work anymore. Okay. So that's the difference. That's like one difference between using function keyword and const. Okay. Yeah, so here we're doing will this work is going to be equal to an anonymous function, console.log no. So yeah, I can do this too, right? I can make an anonymous function like this. It doesn't need to have a name, right? However, I'm defining will this work is a variable, and I'm just setting it equal to a function, right? So this is going to be the same thing. Will this work will be hoisted into memory, and its value will be undefined. So I cannot call this on line 4 anymore. Okay? Everyone good? Nice. So here's some scope best practices. Functions generally should not change globally scoped variables. Okay, if you're doing something like that, that's just like a big red flag. It means you're writing bad code and you're a bad programmer, pretty much. No, I'm just kidding. Don't think that. However, I'm just saying though, generally you should never be doing this. Okay, you should never you shouldn't even define this really. Like let always true true. Like, you shouldn't be defining something unless it's absolutely necessary for your program to run. Like, let's say this is part of a bigger program, and this is real. Like, we need this value to always be true. Function, don't mind me, we change this to false out of nowhere. Don't mind me, we run this here, and then here's this block of code down here that is banking on always true to be true, and it's not. So instead, we throw a new error, everything is broken. And yes, there is a global error object. And a throw keyword, and a new keyword, okay? You could look into those on your own, but we won't really cover those in this course. So that's one best practice that you should be saying. However, this is fine. Let always true equal false. This is okay because I'm no longer changing this variable, right? If I don't have this let here, like over here, I'm saying always true is now going to be assigned to false. So what JavaScript does is, where is always true? Oh, it's up here. So I'm going to reassign it to false. Here, I'm declaring a new variable, always true, inside of don't mind me's local scope, right? So that means that this is no longer being changed. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? All right. All is well. Avoid cluttering the global namespace with lots of variables. Only declare variables globally if they really need to be accessed globally. Otherwise, it's safer to declare variables in functions or blocks, so you don't overwrite variables accidentally, or access the wrong variable by mistake. Both will be likely sources of bugs. So we talked about scope, global functional versus block. Then we talked about a little bit about functions and hoisting, and scope best practices. Any questions? Any questions? How's everybody feeling?
I don't think I studied enough last night.
That's all right, man. You'll get enough scope practice with the workshop. This workshop is kind of dumb, in my opinion. Like I probably won't go over 2 questions from this workshop to give more time for a raise in the second part of the day. However, because the workshop is kind of more, you can almost say they're like brain teasers almost. However, it will strengthen your knowledge about scope. I promise you. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to stop recording.